Are you getting ready to take pre-calculus? In this video, we're going to check whether your Algebra 2 skills are ready for the next level. I'll give you 7 readiness checks covering the most important Algebra 2 topics you'll need before starting pre-calculus. For each one, pause the video, solve the problem on your own, and then compare your work with mine. Let's get started. The first skill you'll need for pre-calculus is function notation. In pre-calculus, you'll evaluate functions, graph them, transform them, and compare them. Before moving on to pre-calculus though, you should be comfortable evaluating functions accurately. Here we have the equation f of x equals 3x squared minus 2x plus 5. We're told to find f of 2 as well as f of -1. Pause the video and try both problems on your own. Okay, so starting with f of 2. Well, for f of 2, we substitute 2 everywhere we see x, right? 2 squared is equal to 4, and 3 times 4 equals 12. Then we subtract 4 and add 5. That gives us 13. Okay, so now let's move on to f of -1. I will say be careful when substituting a negative number. As you can see here, I put -1 in parentheses, and -1 squared is equal to +1. Then -2 times -1 is +2. So our answer here is +10 because we've simply added 3 plus 2 plus 5. Okay, now if you got both answers correct, you're ready for readiness check 1. Now let's move on to readiness check number 2. The next skill is factoring. In pre-calculus, you'll use factoring when simplifying expressions, solving equations, and working with polynomial functions. So let's see if you're comfortable factoring a trinomial when the leading coefficient is not 1. So of course, what you're going to do is factor completely 8x squared plus 14x plus 3. Pause the video and factor this trinomial. Okay, so let's work through this step by step. So since the leading coefficient on here is 8, well, we'll use the AC method. So first we're going to multiply 8 times 3, and 8 times 3 equals 24. So we have 8 times 3 equals 24. And we need two numbers that multiply to 24 and add to 14. Those two numbers are 12 and 2. And that's because, and I'll write this down, 12 times 2 is 24. And 12 plus 2 is 14. Okay, so now use 12 and 2 to split the middle term, 14x. So we'll go ahead and rewrite this as 8x squared plus 12x plus 2x plus 3. So notice that 12x plus 2x still equals 14x. So we haven't changed the value of the expression. So next we're going to group the first two terms together and the last two terms together. So let's group 8x squared plus 12x and 2x plus 3. Okay, so now we're going to factor the greatest common factor from each group. So the GCF, or greatest common factor, of 8x squared and 12x is 4x. So 4x times and that is 2x plus 3. Bring down this plus sign, and we can factor out a 1 here in this group. So that is 1 times 2x plus 3. Okay, so we factor out the common binomial 2x plus 3. So bringing this together, we have 4x plus 1 times 2x plus 3. And this is the final answer. Okay, so one more thing. Let's check our answer by multiplying. So of course, we're multiplying 4x times 2x, which is 8x squared. And then 4x times 3 is 12x. 1 times 2x is 2x. And of course, 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so we got the original trinomial. So that means our factorization here is correct. So if you are able to factor this trinomial completely, you are ready for readiness check 2. All right, so with that, let's move on to readiness check number 3. Now let's check quadratic equations. In pre-calculus, you will continue solving equations involving polynomial functions, so your quadratic skills need to be solid. You should be comfortable solving a quadratic by factoring when it can be factored. So let's take a look at readiness check number 3. And we have this equation, x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. So I want you to pause the video and solve for x. Okay, so we have x minus 7 times x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, so we need two numbers that multiply to give us negative 14 and add to give us negative 5. Those two numbers are negative 7 and positive 2. So we're going to write x minus 7 equals 0 equals 0. And then we'll write, I'll just place or here, x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, so now use the zero product property. So if two factors multiply to 0, at least one of those factors must equal 0. So in this case, we'll solve for x minus 7 equals 0. Well, x equals 7. And of course, I'll say or here. And then solve it for x plus 2 equals 0. Well, x equals negative 2. Okay, so this quadratic has two solutions, 7 and negative 2. So I'll just go ahead and write that here. 7 and negative 2. Okay. If you were able to factor the quadratic and find both solutions, you're ready for readiness check number 3. So with that, let's move on to readiness check number 4. Now let's check exponents and logarithms. Pre-calculus expands on exponential and logarithmic functions, so you should understand the basic relationship between the two. A logarithm answers an exponent question. So these two statements that you see here mean the same thing. 2 raised to the third power equals 8. So log base 2 of 8 equals 3. What I want you to do is solve 2 raised to the x power equals 32. Pause the video and solve for x. Okay. So as you see here, 32 equals 2 raised to the 5th power. So 32 can be written as a power of 2. And as you can see here, the bases are the same. As now that the bases are the same, the exponents must be equal, which means x equals 5. Final answer. If you understand how exponential and logarithmic forms are connected, and you could solve this exponential equation, you are ready for readiness check number 4. With that, let's move on to readiness check number 5. Next are rational expressions. You'll see rational functions throughout pre-calculus, so you need to be comfortable factoring and simplifying rational expressions. There's also one detail you don't want to forget, and that's restrictions. So what I want you to do is simplify this expression. Go ahead and pause the video. Now, as you can see, the numerator x squared minus 9 is a difference of squares. So that can be written as x plus 3 times x minus 3. And of course that is over x plus 3. Okay, so now we do have a common factor of x plus 3 in the numerator and the denominator. So we can go ahead and cancel those out. And of course, we are left with x minus 3. So we're not finished. This is what I want you to see here. The original denominator here cannot equal 0. So we're going to write this as x plus 3 cannot equal 0. So x plus 3 cannot equal 0. Okay, so that means we're going to solve for x. We're going to subtract 3 on both sides. And x cannot equal negative 3. So the simplified expression is, as you can see here, x minus 3 with the restriction that x cannot equal negative 3. So even though the factor canceled, the restriction from the original expression remains. So that means our final answer is x minus 3 and x cannot equal negative 3. Okay, and so again, if you take a look at the original denominator, we have x plus 3, but if you substitute this x with negative 3, negative 3 plus 3 equals 0, so that's why we say x cannot equal negative 3, because you'll have a denominator of 0. So if you remembered to factor, simplify, and keep the restriction, you're ready for readiness check 5. Let's move on to readiness check number 6. All right, now let's check basic trigonometry. Pre-calculus builds on right triangle trigonometry before moving into topics such as the unit circle and trigonometric functions. So before starting pre-calculus, you should know SOH-CAH-TOA. And of course, you should be able to identify the size of a right triangle and recognize the two special right triangles. Another thing I want to point out is that SOH-CAH-TOA helps us remember the three main trigonometric ratios. They are sine, cosine, and tangent. Remember, the hypotenuse is always opposite the 90-degree angle and is the longest side of a right triangle. Okay, so another thing I want to point out, and it is important, is we do identify opposite and adjacent based on the location of theta. So since theta is here in the lower right corner, the side length of 3 is opposite theta. The side length of 4 is adjacent theta. And of course, 5 is the hypotenuse. So what I want you to do here is pause the video and try all three ratios on your own. Okay. Now for sine, we use SOH, and that is opposite over hypotenuse. So that means opposite, let me point that out over here on the triangle. So we have opposite over hypotenuse, which is 3 over 5. So sine theta is 3 over 5. And for cosine theta, we're going to use CAH, which is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent over hypotenuse is 4 over 5. And last but not least, we have tangent theta, which is TOA. We're going to use TOA. And that is opposite over adjacent. Opposite. Oops, I didn't mean to erase that. And that is opposite over adjacent, which is 3 over 4. Okay. So with that, I would say that this is a classic 3, 4, 5 right triangle. Another thing you want to be aware of is that before pre-calculus, you should also recognize two special right triangles. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about those here. Okay, in a 45, 45, 90 triangle, the two legs are equal, as you can see here. And the side ratio is 1 to 1 to root 2. Okay, so 1 to 1 to root 2. And in a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the side ratio is 1 to square root of 3 to 2. Okay? Now, I would say that you don't need to rederive these ratios during this readiness check here, but you should recognize them. All right? And what about the common exact ratios? Well, you should also recognize these values without a calculator. Okay? These values connect directly to the special right triangles, and they do become important as you move into pre-calculus. So I would say here, if you can identify opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse, if you can use SOH-CAH-TOA, recognize the 45, 45, 90, and 30, 60, 90 triangles, and recognize these common exact ratios that you see here, I will say that you're ready for readiness check 6. With that, let's go ahead and move on to the last readiness check, number 7. Now, the final skill is function transformations. In pre-calculus, you'll work extensively with functions and their graphs. So you should understand how changes to an equation affect the graph, right? So here we have the parent function y equals x squared. And let me point that out. And underneath it, we have a transformed version of that function. So what I want you to do here is pause the video and determine how the graph of y equals x squared has been transformed. Okay, so now let's look first at what's happening inside the parentheses. So inside the parentheses, we have x minus 2. And for horizontal shifts, the direction is opposite the sign that we see inside the parentheses. So even though we see minus 2, the graph shifts 2 units to the right. So we'll just write x minus 2. And we'll just say right 2. right 2. Okay, so now look at the number outside the parentheses. So we have a 3, and the plus 3 moves the entire graph vertically. Since it's positive 3, the graph shifts 3 units up. So we'll write plus 3, and there we go. So we have plus 3, and then we'll just say up 3. Okay, so that means our final answer, we'll just say right 2 units. So right 2 units and up 3 units. And final answer. Okay, so compared with the parent function y equals x squared, the graph moves 2 units to the right and 3 units up. So if you identified both transformations correctly, you're ready for readiness check number 7. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the scorecard so you can check your score. Here's the scorecard. If you scored 6 or 7, you have a strong foundation for moving into pre-calculus. If you scored 4 or 5, you're pretty close. Review the skills that gave you trouble before you begin. If you scored 3 or fewer, spend some more time strengthening your Algebra 2 foundation. I will say that extra review can make pre-calculus much easier. So let me know in the comments which readiness check gave you the most trouble. And if you do need more practice, check out the other algebra lessons here on MathByTV. So please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more calm, clear math lessons right here on MathByTV.